Support for Consider This is provided by the University of Nebraska at Omaha College of Communication, Fine Arts, and Media.
From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, food security. Here to talk more about it are Eric Saviano, Program Associate for Economic Justice for Nebraska Appleseed, and Aubrey Mancuso, Executive Director of Voices for Children in Nebraska. Thank you both so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you very much.
Eric, we're going to start with you. What is food security?
Well, thanks again for having us. We are excited to share about this important topic. So, food security is defined as the ability for a family or an individual to have enough food to live a healthy and an active lifestyle. So, we know in the United States today, 1 in 8 Americans are food insecure. They don't have that amount of food that they need, and 1 in 6 children are food insecure.
Wow, and where does that term food security, where does it come from?
Well, it is actually a USDA measure. The census does yearly updates of that measure with their surveying, the community survey. And people think of food insecurity a little bit and may think of hunger, and it's not really a comparable thing. I think hunger is definitely defined really more as that sensation you get when you've missed a meal or you've actually just leading up to a meal. So that painful or tense kind of feeling you get. Whereas food insecurity is more of a measure that takes place over a year, or it shows that you don't have enough food overall.
Wow. Okay. And Aubrey, there are 4 pillars that we want to put up for our viewers. And as we're putting that graphic up, if you could just kind of walk us through those pillars, adding whatever you think is important at this point for us to know.
Right, so the kind of top level is high food security, and that essentially means that you're not worried about where your next meal is coming from. The next level below that is marginal food security, where you may have some anxiety around how you're going to manage food expenses, but that doesn't result in you actually adjusting the quality or the quantity of the food that you eat. Low food security is the next level, in which households actually strategize generally around the quality of food that they eat. So this, for example, is when a household would choose to purchase something like ramen noodles that has a lower nutritional quality because it's more affordable than something like meat or fresh produce. And then there's very low food security, which is the level that we really worry about, especially for children and households with children. And that's when one or more household member actually reduces the amount of food that they're eating in order to make the food stretch over a period of time or throughout the household.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about who those people are later in the program, though. For right now, let's put this in perspective. So nationally, maybe even just a few decades ago, Aubrey, how are we doing with this particular issue?
Better than we are now, and we've actually seen rates of food insecurity increase both nationally and in Nebraska. And it got particularly bad around the recession that we had in around 2007. What's interesting is that we've largely seen a recovery in poverty rates and wages since the recession, but our food insecurity rates have not recovered fully from the recession. We've seen them go slightly down, but we haven't seen the same recovery that we would expect them to follow along with poverty rates and wages.
Wow, and Eric, you'd think that being part of an agricultural state, we'd be a bit immune from all this. Not necessarily the case. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, you'd imagine that an agricultural state like Nebraska would be able to feed itself and all of the people in it with no problems with all of our, livestock and crop production. But a lot of those resources are shipped out of the state, out of the country, and used in other ways. And so we are still kind of left with the food insecurity rate that we have, which is just about in line with what the national average is.
Wow. Okay. So in the history of Nebraska, and you touched on it, Aubrey, but if we were to go back even further, I mean, is this a trend that we've been experiencing? So years and years and years ago, better, and then it's just progressively gotten worse? Or are things like what you described really kind of hitting us, and we've almost been like a roller coaster, for lack of a better term? What's gone on that way?
Well, I'd definitely mention that, like Aubrey said, the recession definitely caused some changes in poverty rates, in security rates, and in food insecurity. And so as that recovery has happened, we've seen changes, but not necessarily where we'd like it to go. Aubrey, I wonder if you have some more to add.
Yeah, I mean, we're still, we're still much higher than we should be. I think the Nebraska numbers are 1 in 7 households, and the food insecurity for kids is almost 18% of kids. So that's nearly 1 in 5 kids in our state, and that's concerning because food insecurity is particularly damaging for kids. They're still developing, they're still learning, and food insecurity can be a barrier to health. That can actually have impacts that last into adulthood, and also to being able to obtain an education. Kids can't learn if they're hungry, and so we've seen those rates at a concerning rate.
I think this would be a really good time in the program to talk about your respective organizations and maybe some others with whom you partner on a pretty regular basis. Aubrey, let's start with you. How would you describe your own organization?
So Voices for Children, our goal is really to ensure that all Nebraska kids have the best possible opportunity to succeed. And we are a child research and advocacy organization. So we ask questions from a data perspective about where we are succeeding when it comes to kids and where we're falling short. And we try to look at those areas where we are falling short and see what we could do as far as changing policies, changing programs, to really ensure that our kids have the best possible opportunity to meet their potential.
And you've been with this organization for quite some time, correct?
About a decade now, yeah.
Yeah, and so how did you get into all of this, Aubrey?
Yeah, well, in addition to being the director of a small nonprofit, I'm a mom. And what I want for my kids is to have their basic needs met, to have opportunities to succeed, to have their lives be free from trauma and traumatic experiences, and I think all kids deserve that, and that's just kind of I want for our community of kids what I want for my own kids.
On a side note, because you mentioned how you guys are looking at things that are going well, things that aren't going so well, just maybe a little sidebar here.
Yeah.
What is going well right now for our kids here in the state?
So in Nebraska, I think there are some great examples of things that are going well. We have one of the highest immunization rates in the country. So we're actually really good at immunizing kids. And we also have really high school graduation rates. So we're also really good at getting kids to complete high school. In addition, our child health insurance rates are at one of the highest levels that we've seen historically. We have a very small number of kids who don't have health insurance. Okay. So those are some data highlights from Nebraska kids.
Well, thank you very much. We will change gears now and go over to Eric, your organization.
Yeah, so Nebraska Appleseed is an organization that's been around for 20 years plus. We're a law and policy organization that fights for justice and opportunity for all Nebraskans. And that is to say that we work in the legislature, we work in the court system, and we work in communities around the state, trying to focus on different areas that help more Nebraskans succeed. So like we're talking about today, we know a little bit about food and health. We also know about or work on foster care and child welfare issues and immigrant and community issues.
Need to know a little bit about a lot of stuff.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
And so my focus definitely is some of the food work. And I'll mention that what brought me into this too leads into what we're talking about today. Just growing up, I think I was led to be a teacher in a high school, and so I studied, got a degree in it, and then I decided to go into nonprofits in schools rather than actual teaching. And from that experience, I saw firsthand kind of the social needs that are not being met by the way some schools are being run, and the potential for more kids to engage in some of the feeding programs and the impact that has on them. So a lot of the work that I get to do is based around some of the school feeding programs in our state and the work that's happening there.
This is tough work, though. I mean, I bet there are days when you feel pretty good about stuff and days where you feel extremely frustrated. So what drives you, Eric? What brings you back to work every single day, gets you up in the morning and makes you feel like you're making a difference?
Well, it's definitely different than seeing a kid meet a milestone or a goal that I used to see in schools. And maybe handing out a coat is a little different to a cold kid, or a food bag to a hungry kid is a little different than trying to create systemic change, which is Appleseed's goal, kind of addressing the root causes of kids being cold and hungry, not having what they need. And so the slow progress, the slow process of change really takes some focus, and so communicating with those school nutrition directors, communicating with state leaders that can influence the change is really what gets me up in the morning.
What are we talking about when we talk staff for you there? You said 20 years the organization's been around, so you're talking about an awful lot of stuff that you're doing. With how many people? Yeah,
our organization is now around 35 people. So split into those organizational areas, and we have some lawyers on staff and some other folks like me who are out in the community working on these issues directly with the people.
Okay, so with this particular issue, you've got your ear to the ground, food security, obviously what we're talking about today. Eric, what do you hear most in terms of feedback from people with this particular topic, other than you guys aren't moving fast enough to solve this problem? What are you hearing? Well, when we bring up issues of food insecurity, I think, and we work closely together with Voices for Children often on this, we hear from folks when we get down to it that the wages in our state are not necessarily keeping up with the needs of families. Okay. Whereas we said that they've definitely met kind of their pre-recession levels, that buying power isn't always there to make ends meet at the end of the month. So when we look at some of our federal programs to help address food insecurity, and we look at the way our programs were designed 30, 40 years ago, some of those eligibility requirements are just a little off from what the reality is today. So directly from people, we hear that they're struggling, and that a little bit of help here and there would make it a lot better. Statewide, what organizations are we missing at the table here today from where the two of you are sitting in terms of collaborative efforts and so forth? Aubrey, for our viewers who are across the state, who else would be closely linked to this?
Yeah, I would say the Center for Rural Affairs is a great resource in Greater Nebraska on some of these issues, and some of our YWCAs also doing great work on food security in communities, local United Ways.
Okay, Eric?
And I could add just that some of those emergency food suppliers, the food net suppliers in Nebraska, like the food banks, Food Bank of the Heartland serves most of the state, and then Food Bank of Lincoln serves the rest. Okay. So southeast Nebraska. So those two work in the advocacy space and also helping meet immediate needs. Okay, and earlier the two of you mentioned some statistics for us, which really put this thing into perspective. But I think if we could drill down a little bit more, personalize this a bit. Aubrey, who are we talking about when we're talking about folks who are
not able to access or food isn't available. Who are these people?
Well, unfortunately, children have one of the highest rates of food insecurity, so this definitely impacts them. We're also talking about rural communities, surprisingly, and in those communities there may be fewer of the resources that we were just talking about, where you can access emergency food than there are maybe in some of our more urban areas. Also seniors. Seniors tend to have low food security, and then this also disproportionately impacts households of color. So they also tend to have higher rates of food insecurity.
When you talk children and older adults, you're talking vulnerable populations to boot, and often, to the point of your organization, people who can't speak for themselves. So
Right.
it's the idea of getting out to them and figuring out who does this impact and how can we help. Let's start maybe on the legislative side and get into solutions maybe, so that we can put some light at the end of the tunnel here. Eric, what's important for us to know in terms of the legislative piece?
Sure. Well, I think we could start at the basics. Nebraska's legislative session, our governing body, is active right now. It has been since January, and it will be through June this year. And there are several bills that are in the legislature right now that could affect child hunger and food insecurity in the state. So Nebraska Appleseed is working really closely on two food in schools bills, so school meals bills. One would eliminate the reduced price copay that kids go through the line at the school and pay for every school in Nebraska. You may know that kids in Nebraska, if they meet a certain income level, they can receive free meals at school. And then if they make a little more, their families do, then they get reduced price meals. And so they pay a little bit, but still get the meals. This bill would make it so those folks who are paying a little more don't have to pay anything. They get more free meals too. And we know that's important around the state because we see those free and reduced price numbers in every school district and every community in our state. So that's number one. The second one deals with kind of a hot topic in the country right now called school lunch shaming. It refers to when students go through the lunch line at school, they don't have enough money or their parents didn't put enough money in their account. And at the register, they're told they don't have enough money and they get their meal taken away and usually get given an alternative cheese sandwich or peanut butter sandwich, something like that. So this bill would make it so those students could go through the line and do no fault of their own. They don't have money in their account. You're talking first graders through even 12th graders. They can go through the line and get the same standard meal that every kid gets. And helps districts figure out a way to make up for some of that lost income because it is supporting our children and supporting the people around us.
What is the cost of an average school lunch these days?
I'm thinking,
$3.10?
Yeah, in Nebraska it's $3.10.
And the important thing for all of us to remember is that for many of these kids who fall into those categories, this is the only healthy meal that they will likely get for that particular day.
Could be, yeah. At our school and our rates of breakfast participation in our state have stayed pretty low compared to others in the country, but we have a lot of work to do to get more students in before the bell and eating meals, so that sometimes if there's one meal a day at lunch, that's something, but if we could get them eating 2 meals a day at school, that'd be even better.
Yeah, and that was my next question. So you are where you are right now, moving forward even within just the next few years, and I know that these things move pretty slowly, but in an ideal world, where would we be 5 and 10 years down the road based on what you've just explained?
Well, I think it would take some work on the part of the district administrators all around our state. Every kid who goes to a public school has their school leadership, and then they have their district leadership. And oftentimes it's those district administrators, the people looking at the numbers and the policies, who are making the decisions on how breakfast is served in schools. So, one thing we always push out, and we talk to lots of districts and we talk to lots of people, we chat with them about alternative breakfast models, so that they're not just serving cafeteria breakfast before the school day.
Right.
So kids have to have a lot of things work for them. They have to get to school before the day starts. They have to either have their bus show up before the school bell, which doesn't always happen, and have the money in their account to pay for these things. But these alternative breakfast models kind of take away some of those barriers. They allow the kids to pick up a meal between first and second period, or they can even just grab it on the way in during the beginning of the day and eat it in their classroom. So those are a couple easy ways that districts could make things a little easier in our state. 5 years from now, I'd love to see us at least in the middle of the pack in the country. Right now we're at 47th in the nation in breakfast participation.
Wow.
And I would just add, there's also another program called Community Eligibility that I think both of our organizations would love to see more schools adopt. And it essentially says, if you have a high enough population that's eligible for public programs, you can just serve all meals in that building for free. There's a very small number of schools that have taken this up to date, but those who have are really finding that it's great, because it reduces that stigma of who's getting the free meal and who's paying, and they're just feeding their kids, and they're also ensuring that hunger isn't a barrier to learning, right? So they're just, if they're hungry, the meal's available. And because of the way the federal program works, schools can really make this work financially if they're willing to innovate and think about moving towards this model.
As we're talking about solutions here, or at least steps in the right direction, SNAP comes to mind. We hear SNAP quite a bit. Aubrey, what is SNAP? And as you're talking about it, we're just going to roll some video for our viewers. But yeah.
So SNAP is what is more commonly known as the food stamp program. And it's intended to help households that may have challenges in affording food or healthy food be able to meet that gap. The interesting thing about SNAP is that it's designed to take into account what a household's expenses are. So when you're applying for the program, they are looking at your household members, your housing expenses, your child care costs, your health care costs, and then trying to determine what do you have left over for food and how can we leverage this program to help fill that gap.
I think as I'm listening to the two of you, it sounds like, we're at least getting onto the right track here. But you know what? Asking for help is not always easy for people, especially if they've been put into a situation that they didn't see coming, which can happen often, right? So, Aubrey, what would your advice be to people who may even be watching today thinking, I should probably get on one of those programs, but I'm just so proud. I don't want to pick up the phone and admit that. What would your advice to those folks be?
Well, for most people who use the SNAP program, the average time on the SNAP program, I think, is about 7 months. So for most people, that assistance really is temporary, and it really can, help you get over a challenge in life, like an unexpected job loss, some unexpected home repairs, car expenses, those things that can really be challenging for families who don't have extra income, and can really help you get over that period of financial stress and move on to a place where you're better able to manage your expenses.
And I would imagine that's a great point, Eric, that you are working in partnership with other organizations. Look, people don't necessarily want to be where they are at that time. What are you doing other than the change in jobs or things like that to help lift people and make sure that they are finding that independence as soon as they possibly can without compromising their situation?
Yeah, well, Well, Nebraska Appleseed is not necessarily involved in directly enrolling people in some of these public assistance programs, but our work is definitely toward encouraging folks who need help to seek help and let them know that that is available. So awareness is high in places where family and friends know that these options are available to them. And that's generally what we work toward and get more people working that way.
I think once people can find the help that they need, it just becomes a little bit easier and more feasible for them to lift themselves up out of wherever it is that they were and move forward. Aubrey, just, 30 seconds here. Final thoughts on this topic in general.
Yeah, well, I think, addressing hunger is something that we have the resources to do in our community. And so the more we can really leverage these programs, make these programs work better so that they support longer term financial security for families, it's a good investment because we're building really healthier communities and healthier kids.
Very well said. I think we're going to go to our graphics here. I want to show folks websites. If they want more information, food security is what we're talking about. accessnebraska.ne.gov, feedingamerica.org, frac.org, neappleseed.org, and voicesforchildren.com. Eric and Aubrey, I want to thank you so much for being here, sharing your time and expertise, and shedding light on this topic. Thank you. Thank our students who are working so hard behind the scenes, our viewers, of course, for watching. As we close, a look at Jean Leahy Mall as seen through the lens of Josiah Navarro, a junior right here at UNO. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at netnebraska.org/Consider This. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.
Support for Consider This is provided by the University of Nebraska at Omaha College of Communication, Fine Arts, and Media.